find ourselves in a series on the Prodigal God, which is based on Tim Keller's book, The Prodigal God, based on the parable of the prodigal son, or the two lost sons. And I've also received inspiration from Henry Nouwen's The Return of the Prodigal Son. Our passage for today is found in Luke 15, 17 through 32, and it reads this way. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.'" And this is the word of God. Thanks be to God. So we have been talking about this parable for a couple weeks now. We're going to talk about it for a couple more weeks. Not quite till the end of May. But we talked originally about kind of the parable, the context it was set in, the folks who were listening to Jesus tell this story. We found out that Jesus was speaking to two groups of people. He was talking to, there was tax collectors and sinners, and there was Pharisees and teachers of the law. And he was telling them various parables, all on the theme of lostness. He had told them three, and then comes two, and then comes this parable of the prodigal son, or the lost sons. We talked about that in this parable, those two sons represented kind of the two groups that Jesus was talking about. The prodigal, the younger son, being the tax collectors and sinners, because the Pharisees had been saying, like, this guy, this Jesus, eats with tax collectors and sinners, so he was addressing that. And then that the elder son, he had said, was the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. So last week, we talked about the younger son and his sort of lostness. And, I mean, I said that I couldn't literally kind of relate to the younger son because, like, epitome of goody two-shoes all my life. And, like, I didn't actually do the wild living that they talk about. But that there are other ways, kind of spiritual lostness that I kind of connected. Now, some of you may have been able to identify with some of the actual literal kind of rebelliousness or wild living that the younger son did. We saw the father's response. We saw how even before he could get there and give his whole spiel, the father had ran to him and restored him as an heir, put a ring on his finger, and just lavished this great celebration. And we stopped there, and now we're looking at Act 2, right, of the parable, which is the elder son. And we see how the elder son was in the field, it says, and he heard the sounds of celebration and dancing. For we said this was an extravagant celebration, probably one like this community probably hadn't seen in the past generation, possibly. It was so great. The fattened calf was it was a delicacy. So there was lots of joy, probably lots of people. And the elder son heard it from afar on his way home and asked the servant, not going in, asks the servant what is going on. I imagine the servant filled with joy and excitement. We're having a party. Your father killed the fattened calf. We're celebrating because his son was lost and is found. And Debbie Downer, older brother, totally dampens that excitement. For he is angry. He is bitter when he hears about this. And he refuses to go in. Now, I don't know if you remember, I think it was last week. Because we talked about the younger son. There was a lot of disrespect that happened. I mentioned in some of the details of the fact that the younger son asked for inheritance while the father was dead, was essentially telling him, I wish you were dead. All of these things, great disrespect. And yet the father responded with compassion. Well, now it's the elder son whose turn is for the disrespect, for this is what we see happening. He refuses to go into the great feast. He refuses to go in the house and thus demonstrate disapproval of his father's decision. The father thus has to come outside to see his son. And this is a demeaning thing to have to do when he is the Lord of the manor and the host of the great feast. The fact that the son refuses to go in and the father comes out. And we see the father pleading with his elder son to come in, and the elder son continues to refuse. He starts listing off things he's upset about: the cost, the calf, the party. More so making the younger son an heir again from now their diminished family wealth. Because they'd sold property, right, to give him his share. He'd spent it, and now he came back, and he's an heir again. An heir to this now lesser family wealth. And he starts listing, I've worked myself to death to earn what I have, and this younger brother hasn't earned a thing, but has actually wasted many things. Where's the justice in that? It's kind of the attitude that he has. He starts going down the record of his rights, how he should have been consulted, and in his anger and bitterness defies the father, not even addressing him the way that inferiors were to address the superiors in that culture, especially in public. He doesn't say esteemed father, but essentially says, look you. And in this culture where respect to elders, remember we talked about respect to family was important, that was a great disrespect in public. Look you. Outrageous behavior. Keller says that a modern day equivalent would be a son writing and publishing a tell-all of the father that ruins the father's reputation and career. This was like a public disrespect kind of thing. And so, as I have done, and in my reflecting, I hope you will reflect, and maybe it'll help you. But as I had been looking at these stories and kind of reflecting on where I see myself in these stories, that's what these parables were for, right? They were stories that would help us to reflect, and they were teachings. But it's important to ask ourselves questions. So, how do I see myself in the elder son? So, hi, my name is Esther, and I am the elder brother. That's how I feel when I was reading. illustrate this. This bitter, resentful man, he seems like an older sibling. I think I asked y'all this earlier on. That was me. I asked the first week, I think, who were elder brothers? Who's the eldest around here? I'm the eldest. Who's the youngest? Do we have younger ones? Okay, and some of the rather your middle ones or only children. So I see a lot of older sibling in this, at least in my way, right? The one who has all these expectations and who follows them and doesn't want to disappoint the parents, and who in many ways maybe are even envious of the freedom of the younger. Like, oh, they get to do whatever they want, and I'm like really good, and they still get loved on, and how come? Or maybe that's just me. I don't know. But there's a lot of that, right? And the questioning of the fairness of doing the proper things. And in many ways, honestly, kind of the idea of why didn't I have the courage to run away? Like, I kind of wish I would have just didn't have all this responsibility and I could have just done whatever I wanted to do. But no, I didn't do that. I was good type of attitude. I see that in myself a lot. And when it goes even deeper, because it does go deeper, and it is essentially a form of lostness and sinfulness, is when this inner resentment builds up. See, we can easily notice this younger son lostness, right? It's kind of evident, like, yeah, if you kind of spend all your money on prostitutes, wake up in like a cow field or pig field, and you're like, kind of lost everything. Probably obvious that I lost my way kind of thing. That's pretty evident, right? That one's easy to detect. The elder brother one isn't so much so. And it so reveals itself in these ways. In the response of when the father comes or when there is celebration and joy, this response that comes out of seemingly nowhere is bitterness and anger. Maybe some that we'd never noticed before, and that emerged as a result of the fact that there's this seemingly unfair. And so as I've reflected kind of for myself, I've seen that in myself before. People who then return or who've wasted time and then come back, and then I'm like, and I've been here the whole time. And then maybe if they try to give advice or something, how this person there tell me how to do things, or that kind of situation. I think it reveals itself a lot also in judgment and condemnation, anger, resentment, bitterness, and jealousy. Like I said, one that's not easily detected unless it arises out of these situations. Now we can ask ourselves, which does more damage, this lust or the resentment piece? We find a lot of prejudice, condemnation, anger, and all around the people who seemingly are the ones trying to avoid sin, who are trying to be the best, wedded to the desire to be good and virtuous. So, I don't know, maybe I'm precocious or something, but I feel like I had this experience as a teenager. I was this little, and I've told some of this story before, but I was this little goody two-shoes, super little zealous child who wanted to be in church all the time and wanted to be good. And honestly, just kind of trying to not do, to avoid sin, to avoid temptation. But I found myself, what kind of revealed itself was I was pretty darn miserable. There was no joy in trying to be this zealous person, trying to be good. What resulted was this moralistic and fanaticism, honestly. And I didn't feel good about being in the Father's house. I didn't actually experience that joy. And so this quote from Henry Nouwen resonated with me. It said, "Joy and resentment cannot coexist." And I was thinking about that in the idea of when a heart doesn't feel like it receives what it's been due, or the bedrock of it is resentment, or right or wrong. It's hard to receive all of that. For me, kind of what ended up happening, and this was kind of just a big thing that I remember, but I still keep kind of struggling with it, was the idea of grace. Essentially what I discovered was that it was all unmerited, that I actually couldn't earn it or not, that it was God's gift, right? But I often, as I said, kind of forget. And when I start noticing this spirit of condemnation, this cycle really of condemnation and then self-condemnation, they keep reinforcing each other, and it spins me down a spiral of self-rejection where I get lost. And the questions come, can I ever think of myself as equally loved as the younger brother? And for me, it ultimately does come down to kind of that idea of self-rejection. And do I think I am loved as much as the younger brother? So the question begs to be asked, can the elder son be found too? How can we be lifted out of the slavery of resentment? The healing seems a little more difficult for this sort of lostness, if it's rooted kind of in the who we are or how we see the world. And maybe also even along with some of our deepest held virtues. What I have discovered is that this lostness, this cannot be healed or fixed by myself. I've tried, and I've tried, and I've failed, and I've failed. Let's look really briefly and then come back at this, at how the father responded to the elder son. Open rebellion, because this kind of speaks to that lostness. An acceptable response, given the circumstances, would have been to disown him right there, right then and there, in this public shaming. But what does the father do? Again, not the expected response. He responds with amazing tenderness. He says, "My son." Once again, doesn't say, "Look, you, get it together. You've been here all along. Get your butt in the house." He responds again, "My son. Despite how you've insulted me publicly, I still want you in this feast. As much as you want me to disown your brother, I will not do that. And I also don't want to disown you. As challenging as you find this, I want you to swallow your pride and come into the feast. The choice is yours. Will you or will you not?" And it's a dramatic appeal which has the listeners on the edge of their seats. Both of the sons are alienated from the father's heart at some point in the story. And the questions arise, will the family finally be reunited in unity and love? Will the brothers be reconciled? Will the elder brother be softened by this remarkable offer and be reconciled to the father? But the story ends, leaving these questions unanswered. What do y'all think? Why doesn't Jesus finish this story and tell us what happens? Now remember that the real characters of the story are those Pharisees that are listening. And essentially Jesus is wanting them to respond. Jesus is redefining everything we thought we knew about our relationship with God. He's saying that the Father essentially only is good, and that he loves both of his sons. The Father does not force his love on either son. And the elder brother doesn't know about grace. discovering grace, all of these things, that it is the Father who is only good, means that you are not the judge, that no one is worthy of God's love, that good or bad, being bad or being good is not the answer, that neither of those things makes us worthy or unworthy, that neither of those things saves us. That if it were all to be just and fair, we would probably both be disowned, and the Father would be alone and not be disrespected ever again. That what brings joy is neither those things, but loving the Father. For see, both of the sons essentially loved other things more than the Father himself, right? The younger son loved the Father's things, loved his own self, his self-discovery. And the elder son loved this morality, this moral conformity. Both of those things they probably thought would bring them happiness and fulfillment. They both thought that in those things they would find personal significance and worth. Maybe both of those things would address all that is wrong with the world. But each side had their problem. But the Father's response was the same to both. And so, those are these ideas of lostness. And where do you kind of find yourself? What is your response when the Father celebrates on those who have not been around as long as you have, who have maybe completely disrespected the Father, who have wasted maybe things you've worked for? Is your response that bitterness that maybe we didn't even know was there? Or do you join in the feast? So I ask that you continue to reflect on these ideas, that you continue to reflect on the idea of grace and of the prodigal God. Prodigal meaning spendthrift. This God who is open and liberal with his grace. So let's pray. God, we give you thanks once more for the ways that you speak to us through your word. For the fact that even and when we do fail, when we miss the point, when we think of ourselves better than others, when we try to be the judge, that you treat us tenderly, that you long for us to be in the celebration with you, that you do long for reconciliation with our brothers and sisters, and with you. God, continue to speak with us through this word. Bring it to mind throughout the week. Reveal to us the places where we need growth, where we need forgiveness. Bring healing where healing is needed, God. And thank you for being the prodigal God that you are. We pray all this in your name. Amen.